I think this is going to be a fabulous conversation. We're going to have a little bit of AI. We're going to have a little bit of carbon removal. We're going to have a little bit of enterprise planning. This panel has it all. But I think maybe we start with you, David, to kick us off. This conference was titled Encoding Resilience, which is a phrase I put together because I thought it would play really well in Mountain View. And it has. But let's talk about how you got involved with AI and then how you got interested in how AI can help with encoding resilience and building climate solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm David Schreier. I'm a professor of practice with Imperial College, which is the #6 university in the world, and also run a venture studio. And so I wrote my first AI software program in 1991. And it wasn't very interesting, and it wasn't very useful. And AI at the time was not terribly interesting or useful other than in academic circles. So I sort of set it to one side. And so it's been really exciting within the last decade to see how AI has really been coming into its own, particularly in the last 18 months or so. And so, as we're watching this AI revolution begin to gather steam, I started working on a book called Welcome to AI. And that caused me to research more deeply what's been going on with the AI revolution. And something interesting popped up because as I'm thinking about all this stuff and looking at, very deeply at how OpenAI does what they do, I started looking at the energy demands for AI. And so I don't know if you know how much electricity OpenAI used to train GPT-4, which is their current model. They used 50 gigawatt hours of electricity just to train the model. So I'm sitting there and thinking more broadly about this question of, we've got all of this AI technology that we all want and we all want to use, but how are we going to fuel it? What is the electricity that we're going to supply into these systems? And I was really grappling with this. I looked at renewables, and renewable capacity is nowhere near enough to meet our demand, our voracious demand for what we want AI to do for us. It'll get there someday, we hope. But right now, we still need to rely on legacy infrastructure. So I've been really wrestling with this question, what do you do? How can we get all that AI that we want and not have it destroy the planet? And as I'm thinking through that problem, that's when I met Kempton. And Kempton, I learned from him how we can actually use AI to solve the problems, the energy demands, and the problems associated with the energy demands created by AI. So AI can actually be used to encode resilience into the system. And so that was exciting to sort of see what he's doing.
So Kempton, that brings us to ECO. Explain what ECO is and what was your motivation for starting it?
So the emissions capture company is effectively, it's a carbon capture, sulfur capture, and utilization company. This is the beginnings of it. The principle was that waste is what you have when you run out of imagination. And in doing that, designing modularized plants that can integrate with small footprints. For example, our first client being Nestle, the Swiss multinational, where they have 200 of their 386 plants in 81 countries are powered by hydrocarbons. And the footprints are too small to manage solar, wind, and battery for thermal power and pressure. But that was just part of it. The way we were really looking at it is when you look at Nestle's chimneys or Unilever's or now with Energy Transfer, the bottom line is we were looking at the chimney as basically a free Bunsen burner. So if I were in the chemical industry and trying to build a plant from scratch, I am now getting the free CapEx, free OpEx, free land, and then capturing that carbon, sulfur, PM2.5, processing it into sustainable commodities that I've pre-sold in dollars on forward-looking contracts. But in that whole process, one of the challenges for a lot of these groups has been getting a stable flow rate when you're capturing from those post-combustion or amine systems. And so more out of necessity than anything, we developed a pretty serious algorithm and AI platform that we didn't realize was worth what he discovered what it was worth until we were told it was. But basically, it's using computational chemistry whereby we're characterizing the waste gas compounds at the point of combustion, regardless if you're burning biomass, coffee grinds, waste energy, nat gas, pet coke, whatever it might be. And the AI actually characterizes those emissions and processes them so that our plant can react accordingly and also tell the host site itself how to run their plant more efficiently as well. It also provides a provenance of capture that can be digitized. But beyond that, it's really an interesting set of patents that can be applied to any chemical process or carbon capture process, or even just thermal energy process. So that's really how the nexus came about between David and myself.
So then to bring in energy transfer, you're the one putting this actually into action and actually deploying it.
Yes, that's correct. Hi, I'm Will Doffmeyer from Energy Transfer. If you're not familiar, we're one of the biggest pipeline midstream oil and gas companies in the country. And you know, honestly, I got to know Kempton before I even got to Energy Transfer. I was a attorney in Washington, D.C. for many years, and then I went into the government, and I was the general counsel of an agency that promoted U.S. investors building infrastructure projects in emerging markets. And Kempton and I were classmates in college, although we didn't know each other very well. And he got a hold of me, and next thing you know, I was going to South Africa to visit his Nestle facility. And I thought it was, you know, phenomenal. The joke around the agency that, you know, I like to take credit for, Gibson says some other people have said this too, but we called the project that we were supporting the coal to cookies, because it was taking, you know, basically coal, flue gas, post-combustion flue gas, and turning it into baking soda. I didn't realize at the time that baking soda is used in everything, including animal feed, which I'm sure we'll get to. But the coal to cookies idea was, you know, something that was really interesting to me, and our agency spent a lot of time helping Kempton's company grow in South Africa and get the sort of visibility that it needed. So then fast forward, I left the government and came down to Dallas to work at Energy Transfer. And when we decided to launch an alternative energy group, we're a pipeline company, everybody kind of looked around and said, who knows anything about this? And really by virtue of the fact that I'd been in DC, worked for a development finance agency that had a lot of wind and solar and things like that, they asked if I would take the lead, but the mandate was pretty clear. It was, you know, only invest in things that are going to make us money, right? And there's other people doing, when it comes to...
Not unusual in businesses.
Yeah, exactly. But from an emissions reduction standpoint, Millie did a good job of explaining methane. From our standpoint, a methane leak, I mean, methane is our product. In addition to crude oil and other things, we ship a ton of methane. So if those guys identify a place where we're losing a lot of methane, that is just literally our bottom line right there. So there's huge incentives baked in for us as a midstream company to not have these emitter, super emitter events or anything like that. Carbon dioxide, on the other hand, at least in the United States, when I got there, we viewed it completely as a waste product, right? It comes out of the ground with the methane, you strip out the CO2 to clean up the gas in order to send the gas down the line. And the Inflation Reduction Act, which I'm sure people talked about this morning, has obviously created lots of incentives to put value on that CO2. The midstream space is still grappling with how to deal with an industry that's completely supported by the people in DC. My company very much included, but something like what Kempton's doing, where you're taking this waste stream and turning it into a valuable product, is something that any business-minded person can get their head around. It's near and dear to my heart because it's something that I was helping promote beforehand, but it's a perfect fit for what I'm doing now at Energy Transfer.
So, and we're not going to go that far down the political route, but like, obviously this is going to be an interesting year in the United States in terms of administrations, policy. Is there any way to sort of build some resilience into our political system that creates some consistency from a policy perspective, having worked in Washington?
You know, speaking for me, the former DC attorney and government official, you know, and not for my company, I would say that I'm not worried about these tax incentives going away. I would challenge anybody to show me a tax incentive that's ever gone away. It's like agencies in the government, they don't go away. Tax credits typically don't. But even if somebody comes along and says, we've gone way too far over our skis with these tax credits, it's going to cost the budget X amount, I think it's still going to be done prospectively. You know, I mean, I hate to say it, ExxonMobil, these people who are spending billions of dollars on this stuff are doing it in reliance on these tax credit programs. Being a former litigator, I've researched, would it even be constitutional to rip it out from underneath? I think it probably would, but politically tenable, it doesn't seem like it. You know, one of the few things that enjoys bipartisan support in DC is carbon capture and utilization. It's not, there's people on the far right who don't like it, there's people on the far left who don't like it, but it has a lot more bipartisan support than many of the things in the Inflation Reduction Act. And I personally don't see it as an issue. That being said, the company's used to offtake contracts, creditworthy partners, things like that. And this is different, and it scares them. And you say DC in any social circle now, and everybody rolls their eyes and say, don't invest based on predictability out of the nation's capital.
Yeah.
So the sort of thing that Kempton's doing is the best from my standpoint. We're still looking, working hard, spending a lot of money at these more of the large-scale sequestration where you put the CO2 underground or hydrogen or ammonia, a lot of this other new energy, call it what you want, sustainability, but it's an easier sell if I got a commercial market. And Kempton's deal, which he hadn't explained, but has a special appeal for the Texans because what we're gonna do with the CO2, or what he's gonna do with the CO2 when he makes it, is sell it to animal feed to feed the cows. And I didn't know this at all, but the biggest consumer of baking soda out there is cows. Okay. And they do it for we have someone here with us who could explain this a lot better, but it's like Tums, it's like antacid. So it's actually reducing the methane that the cows emit in addition to making the pH balance of the milk or whatever it might be. So when you're talking Texas and you're talking oil and gas and cows and commercial returns,
Right,
IRRs, financial models, that's the kind of thing that I can sell internally, easier than the other things, but I don't want to downplay the other things. We're looking at it across the board.
And if I can build on this question, because we diligence the political risk question before we put capital at risk. So Chris Skidmore is one of the advisors to the company. Chris was the Minister of Energy for the United Kingdom who signed, he was the first G7 minister to sign the Net Zero Accords. And we said to him, hey, Chris, you did the net zero review for the UK. You looked at 1,800 sustainability technology companies. This is the only one that you agreed to advise when you stepped down from the cabinet. Why Echo? And he said, Dave, out of 1,800 companies, it's the only one that does not rely on government subsidy to be profitable. And so this kind of new business model where you can do something good for the planet that's also good for the bottom line at scale in this space is really quite exciting.
So Kempton, maybe break down like what exactly you're doing, all those different sort of end products that you're going to wind up with, and then how you're going to monetize each one of those, just in plain English. Like it's a great example of like where it's going into the feed's going to reduce emissions. It's just creating extra products using a chemical process. Just try and simplify people so they can, because how many times I've heard people say, well, why don't we just take what's coming out of the top and then resell it somewhere? And it sounds like that's what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, and to be very candid, we weren't the first to do this. It was just we're doing it the most effectively in terms of energy, water, footprint, and using reliability of the flow rates using the AI. So one of the challenges in the past has, one, been economic feasibility on the back end. But the way the process simply works is just imagine me showing up to a Nestle property or Unilever, and you just notice that I keep on mentioning the fast-moving consumer goods companies. One of the reasons we've been targeting them initially was because by decarbonizing their plants, their products actually then become sustainable, but at the same time, they are buying back the end products to reduce their Scope 3 supply chain, where we actually have orders of magnitude of reduction that's been audited by Deloitte, up to 22x. So basically, we're utilizing the Scope 1 emissions from the chimney, pulling that out, using the AI to actually manage those molecules. We're not scrubbing, but we have a proprietary piece of equipment that's derivative from the semiconductor industry that actually isolates the gases, the carbon, the nitrogen, and the oxygen, to a 100% purity level at pharma grade. At that point, you can then do anything you want with it with the CO2. In fact, we've been approached by a lot of CO2 utilization companies whose biggest challenge is getting pure grade CO2 from this situation. So in a lot of ways, we're almost mining the CO2 itself. But that said, from there, in our first product that was the easiest for the bankers and the financiers to understand, it's kind of like, as Will said, hold of cookies. We used some US Department of Defense engineers to actually update the Solvay process of 165 years ago, and looking at previous attempts at doing this, how to actually make it more water, energy, and footprint efficient. And that's ultimately bicarbonate of soda for cosmetics, dialysis, animal feed, and so forth. But there are some derivative patents we have in there that include carbon-free ammonia using wave chemistry and regenerative soil supplements as well. But that's part of the pipeline. We have a carbon-sulfur technology mosaic that we go, and it's almost like a cascading set of solutions that whenever we have a new waste stream, we're then addressing the next waste stream.
Great. So David, maybe we wrap. We've talked about AI, but it's almost just another tool that's being built into the process. It's part of the company's toolkit now. But I mean, we've done this a couple of times today that talk about the two sides of the AI coin, the extraordinary cost of these solutions, but then also the extraordinary potential for AI to solve some of these problems. Maybe talk a little bit about how you see some of the solutions coming down the road.
Yeah, I mean, big picture, AI has finally gotten powerful and flexible enough that we can use it to solve sort of global scale problems. Previously, all this prior generations of AI, it was applicable to niche, right? We started in 1980 with credit card data and airline ticketing routing, right? And even as recently as 2010, we're still using AI for fairly limited applications. And so where we're seeing things going forward is it's now getting to the place where it can begin to tackle really large-scale problems of climate, of the fundamental chemistry that goes behind what creates the climate crisis, a number of other human domains. Like, we're also applying computational chemistry in the healthcare area. It not only gave us one of the COVID vaccines in less than a year, the Moderna vaccine, but we also now are starting to see new drug discovery being rapidly accelerated by these systems. So the future is actually quite bright. We may be able to address some core problems with climate that have been intractable thanks to the potential that AI is now opening up.
Very cool. I think we've got time for one question from the audience, if anybody's got one. It's hard for me to see.
There's one right here in the middle.
There's one always has a question.
Just for context, David, you mentioned that GPT-4 was 50 gigawatt hours too, and that sounds like a big number, but I'm
It's 18,000 households for a day.
What's that?
18,000 households for a day.
Yeah, but I look at, say, large technology companies, they might use, 2,000 gigawatt hours in a year. So 50 to develop a very powerful product doesn't seem like a lot to
That
me.
was just to train one model,
Yeah.
not use the model. So every time you make a picture of a cat using DALL-E, that's like charging your phone for a day, right? It's an incredible amount of energy to actually use these things. And part of what makes it challenging is our usage is scaling exponentially. So ChatGPT was the second most rapidly adopted consumer technology in history. It went from 0 to 100 million users in 6 weeks. So you have 100 million people every time they run a query charging their phone effectively. And people don't just stop with one picture of a cat. They make many pictures. We were talking about this before the conference. Dan had his intern do some photos for a magazine, and she came up with 240 pictures in an hour. That was 240 phone charges of one user for 1 hour. So the amount of electricity we're using just in one company is enormous. And ChatGPT, OpenAI is only one AI company. We've got Google, we've got Meta, we've got 3 other big tech. We've got the 3 big tech in China. It's probably 8 companies that are using more electricity than a mid-sized nation, and it's growing exponentially. GPT-5, the next OpenAI model, is going to have 50 times as many interconnections as GPT-4. So, I mean, these things are energy hogs, and they're getting more so.
All right, I think we're going to leave it there. You guys are going to stick around so you can be part of the town hall at the end of the day, but thank you so much for coming on stage and talking to us today.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.